First of all, welcome to the op-ed writing workshop featuring Dr. Stacy Torres. Really excited to have you all here. As I mentioned a second ago before, probably a half of you had joined on. 280 people have registered for this event, which I think speaks to how important it is for us to get our voices out there in this current political landscape. My name is Mindy Freed. I'm an applied sociologist based in Boston, and I co-chair the Media Relations Committee of SWS along with Erin Baker-Giza. So today's workshop is sponsored by SWS's Media Relations Committee, in collaboration with two SWS committees, Sister to Sister and Social Action, as well as two ASA sections, Sociological Practice and Public Sociology and Political Sociology. This op-ed workshop is part one of two in a two-part series, and I will talk about part two at the end of our workshop. I just want to let you know that we are recording the large group presentations, and so if for any reason you don't want to be identified, do what you need to do to make your name go away or whatever. I would say that we're all too aware of the power of the media in influencing public opinion. And we know right now that a lot of the media is offering people falsehoods, misinformation, and even the good outlets are not providing the kind of critical analysis that they need to provide. And so that is where we come in. And so, as I said, about 280 plus people have signed up for this. At the time that we looked at the stats, thank you for filling out the survey, I appreciate that. Based on 269 people who had registered for the workshop, 23% have written an op-ed. And of those who wrote an op-ed, 70% got their op-ed published either in national media or in local media. It's pretty impressive. Also, just to give you a sense of the breadth of the group who registered, 34 states are represented. We even have people from outside of the country, including Canada, Nigeria, Sweden, and Zimbabwe. The topics are far-ranging in terms of what you are all focused on. And I'm just going to say this super quick, but academia, arts, aging, childcare, education, elder care, family, global health, human rights, labor, immigrants, sexual violence, race, and more. So that we hope today, this is, a 2-hour workshop. It's not a whole day kind of immersion thing, but we hope that it'll give you a boost to write and submit your writing to local and national media outlets. It's a start. And if there ever was good timing, it's now. We need your clear voices and your analysis, and we want to help you translate your scholarship into succinct public-facing writing that contributes to the dialogue in a meaningful way about critical and often controversial issues. So our agenda for today includes just Stacy Torres will join us, and she'll provide an overview and case example. We are going to have 2 breakout sessions, one that will focus on you all working with some colleagues around the kinds of things that you want to write about, and the second, thinking about how to get published. And we have one free write kind of snuck in there, a very quick one. And then we'll have a Q&A with Stacy. So we are stuffing a lot into a small amount of time, but we're excited that you're all here, and it's, we'll do the best we can. So I am thrilled to welcome Stacy Torres, who will lead today's workshop. Stacy is an assistant professor of sociology in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences at University of California, San Francisco School of Nursing. You may also have noticed her op-eds, especially people from SWS, because she kindly shares them with us, but she is a prolific writer and public sociologist whose articles, essays, and op-eds for broader audiences have appeared in Contexts, Reuters, Slate, the LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle, the Washington Post, the New York Times, US Today, and lots more. So Stacy's research and teaching interests include gender, aging, and the life course, physical and mental health, social relationships, qualitative research methods, and urban communities. And she has a book coming out. She's the author of a forthcoming book with the UC Press called At Home in the City, Growing Old in Urban America. I can't wait to read. Stacy is a proud first-generation college graduate who grew up in New York City. So I am going to turn this over to Stacy and look forward to hearing all that you have to share with us.
Thank you so much, Mindy, and thank you for everybody for attending today. It's really an honor, and I'm so excited to share, hopefully, mistakes that maybe you will avoid along the way, although you'll have to make your own mistakes and learn from them, and it's really part of the fun. So I have a very bare bones PowerPoint that I have to share with you that hopefully will guide the talk, and I'm just gonna attempt to do that now. So let me just share here and see if this works. And this is not the good version. we did do some tech support before, so I'm going to stop that. I'm going to try one more time, and hopefully we will get there. Okay, this seems to be okay. Can you see my screen, Mindy? And if I go like that, wait, okay.
That
I'm
looks
able
great.
to advance it. Okay, great.
You got it.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Trying here, so thanks for your patience. So yeah, I'm so excited to be with you all today. And I should preface my remarks by saying that the things that I'm going to share are not exhaustive. I don't have a long list of do's and don'ts or some formula for how to get published. But I will share my experiences along the way, some things that have worked for me, some considerations, but there's so many different disciplines represented and backgrounds represented. So there's really no one size fits all. So a little bit about, I just see a window coming up, translation, save, I guess that's fine. So I'm just gonna go to the next slide. Okay, so who is this workshop for? I put this question up front because I've had people ask me as they have received information about this workshop, wondering, they are not in the social sciences or they're not a sociologist. Should they attend? Is this appropriate? And I really see this workshop as being for everyone. And so even though I'm a sociologist by training, I aim to help people in any discipline find their voice and their topics and really hone their ability to communicate their expertise to broader audiences. And as Mindy mentioned, we have so many different research interests and backgrounds represented. So I'm really hoping that everybody can find a little something that they can take away and use to disseminate their ideas with whatever audience they're looking for. Just a little bit about me. So I have a PhD in sociology. I'm a sociologist on a health sciences campus. And so this has really been interesting for me because I'm located in the School of Nursing. And so I interact with people from all sorts of different backgrounds in my university. And it's been really exciting. It's really pushed me to try to also explain a little more about what sociologists do and how they can collaborate with other health science professionals. So that's been very rewarding and challenging as well. I studied comparative literature in college. And so I preface that by saying I came to sociology actually through literature. And I also studied creative nonfiction earlier in my life. I pursued an MFA in fine arts in nonfiction writing at Columbia University straight out of college. So I've always felt, I guess, engagement with literature and just trying to write accessibly for a range of audiences. I also think it's really important to put out there that I'm the first person in my family to go to college. And so I always felt that if I couldn't explain something that I was writing to my mother, who was an avid reader and a lifelong secretary, that I was doing something wrong, for myself. And so I always felt like even if I was using a term, a sociological term or jargon, that it needs to be clarified, defined, and I would never want to put up walls that would keep out somebody like my own mother from engaging with my work. So today, I'm really organizing my remarks here around questions I've received over the years about op-ed writing from individuals and also groups of professors and students that I've spoken to. I myself never took a class on op-ed writing. In fact, my first publication was a letter to the New York Times when I was in college. It was actually the year of September 11th, and my sisters had gone very close. They were attending high school at one of the schools closest to Ground Zero. And I identified an oversight in some of the Times coverage because they were highlighting this very elite high school, Stuyvesant. And I said, well, wait a second, there were people that were even closer. So that was my first publication in October 2001 when I was in my last year of college. Then a couple months later, I had another letter in the New York Times about this museum of history that was being opened in Chile, where my father is from. And so that was my second publication. So then I really just, I guess, love seeing my name in print, that I could go to the corner store, pick up a New York Times and see my name, and that somebody felt that I had something to say and it was worth printing it out. So that was exciting. But I never took a class, and op-eds seemed to be the next logical progression in terms of me trying to get my ideas out there, because while approaching a magazine editor seemed entirely terrifying, and I didn't know how to locate the contact information. This is kind of in the earlier days of the internet. Op-eds always had like op-ed at New York Times, send your piece here. And so for me, it felt like approachable. And so I've had to learn a lot by doing and just trying and continuing to learn that way. And so I'm hoping that today my overview and that this workshop will give you a jump start on drafting and publishing your own pieces. And I do hope to help you avoid some of the mistakes I've made along the way, though they were not terrible, fatal errors. And you'll also have to make your own mistakes and learn from them. And for some, this material might be a refresher. You may have experience, and this is kind of, it's always good to hear. At least I'm a big fan of repetition. Sometimes I need to hear something 5 and 10 times to get it down once. For other people, some of this may be very new material, and that's exciting as well. And so no matter your experience, whether you have more experience, you have zero experience, I really do hope that you will feel more comfortable to keep pursuing your op-ed writing after you leave this workshop today. And ideally, by the workshop's conclusion, you will at least have a draft of an idea that you want to carry on with, and some answers, I'm hoping, to 5 basic questions that I'm going to put forth that should help you structure your op-ed. And ideally, a publication strategy that includes identifying 3 news outlets of some sort where you would want to send your piece. So that's kind of the outline for our time together. So another question, and it may seem obvious, but sometimes I don't think it is why even write and publish op-eds? And one question I've received often over the years is, what do I think the impact of an op-ed is, or my work? And I would say it's really impossible to predict what impact any op-ed has. It's like I have this idea, I put it out in the world, I hope people take it in, but it's really hard to control how they will interpret it. And that's a whole other kind of, maybe that's a part 2 workshop about navigating reader responses when your op-ed ideas potentially not interpreted exactly the way that you had hoped. But some reasons to write op-eds include, disseminating your research. And so you may have like a journal article, a scholarly publication, and you want to put it out in another form that's more accessible to broader audiences. So that may be one goal. Another goal can be, although it's hard to tell exactly, if it's effective or not, is influencing policy, but definitely putting yourself into a public debate where policymakers may read your work is something I think is a worthy goal and something I always hope to do. You may want to try to help shape public opinion or simply educate the public in some way. Um, in terms of some of the benefits that I've received from op-ed writing over the years, it's really been a serendipitous and exciting journey for me. And I could have never predicted, all of the different people that would have read my work. And so, for example, when I was in graduate school, I had an op-ed in the New York Times about my research about older adults who were socializing in neighborhood places. And one of the places that they went to was McDonald's. And in a different part of New York City at that time, there were these older adults in Flushing, Queens, which has a large Asian American population. And these older adults were from Korea, and they were hanging out at McDonald's all day. And the manager of this McDonald's called the police on them for loitering. And so this became like a multi story sort of feature in the New York Times. And one of my professors at the time, who also had published a lot of op-eds in my PhD program, Dalton Conley, said, you should write an op-ed about this. And I did. And lo and behold, it did get accepted by the New York Times, like on the first try, which was a total surprise to me. Anyway, so through that, my book editor from the University of California Press found me when this op-ed was published or was posted on Facebook, which I don't even use social media, but it was posted there. Over the years from different op-eds, I've received assorted media attention. I've been invited to participate in radio and print and television interviews based on different opinion columns that I have put together. Of course, I've made connections with larger scholarly communities, so academics and other sociological subfields, also adjacent disciplines, social work, public health, and even vastly different fields in terms of, for instance, my interest in social isolation. I've had like computer scientists get in touch with me, people in hard sciences. So that's been really interesting. I've made very valuable connections with people who are in the community, service providers, public servants, people involved in government have read my op-eds and gotten in touch with me. And actually, funny enough, in my most recent op-ed, love found its way into my life because a long lost acquaintance saw my latest op-ed in the LA Times. We had lost track, and they contacted me after seeing this article, after like 8 years of just not being in touch. So you just never know, who's out there reading your writing and where it might lead. All right. So for some people, this may be fairly straightforward in terms of like, how do you find your subjects? And for others, it might be a little bit more challenging. So, what sparks an idea? What inspires you or urges you to write? For many people, these motivating public issues that urge you to kind of write and share with the public may derive from your research and teaching. That seems to be a logical flow out of the things that you're working on already. But really, your interests, your topics, your subjects can come from any identity that you occupy, whether it's in your family, in your community, in your workplace, on your campus, for example. And for me, I've written opinion pieces from my vantage point as a pedestrian without a driver's license, a family caregiver, a person with a chronic autoimmune disease, a grocery shopper, a lifelong New Yorker, the daughter of an immigrant, and as a first-generation college student from a working class background. So those are some examples of all like kind of the hats that I've worn in different op-ed pieces. So from my MFA days, I really liked this exercise that I'm going to share with you. And it's quite simple, but I thought it was very revealing. When I was 22, I started in this MFA program in writing. And I had actually already had, varied life experience. My mother had passed away when I was a teenager, and I took care of my younger sisters, and I had a lot of responsibilities at an early age, but I was still only 22 years old. And so I think for people, especially I've spoken with people who are younger, and they'll say, look, I don't have anything published. I don't have as much life experience. Like, what am I an expert in? And I'll say this, for people who are running into stumbling blocks, finding your topics, I found that this exercise that my professor at the time, Patty O'Toole, in a writing workshop at Columbia University did with us was really effective. And this is 2 decades ago, but I find that it still rings true in my experience. So she asked our class to list 4 things we loved and 4 things we hated. And she just said, bullet point these these things, you know, 4 things that you're really enamored with, 4 things that you hate or get you angry, and just bullet point them, nothing fancy. So I made a list, everybody in the class made a list, and I recall loosely naming neighborhoods, social justice, supporting family as some examples of things that I really loved and felt were important. And then like poverty and gentrification were among the things that I really hated, that angered me. And after we compiled our lists, Professor O'Toole said, these are going to be the themes that you write about for the next few years. And I was just floored at how correct she was, at least in my case. And I still writing on these themes, of course, have added things since then. And so I always thought that that was kind of a good way to get started. So discovering your writing voice. And, you know, we all have different voices that we use in many different parts of our lives. We have a scholarly voice we might use in our day-to-day work, you know, within academia. But really, it is a good question. You know, how do you explain your ideas, sometimes to yourself first and then to others? How do you engage in this act of translation? Because I do think that there is some sort of translating going on, even if it's kind of simplifying, defining, clarifying your scholarly idea. What tone do you take? And what makes for a persuasive and compelling voice that sounds like you? And there's no one size fits all answer to that. You know, people are coming from different subjects, they might be approaching different audiences, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I thought this was also another way into thinking about this that I'm going to highlight. And so I suggest trying to describe your idea, writing a letter to a friend in terms of like a very curious friend who may not be, and probably better, think of somebody that's outside of academia, but is very interested in things you're doing. And I cannot take credit for this exercise. When I was a PhD student at NYU, dear Professor Ruth Horowitz suggested this exercise. And I was very skeptical at the time of all kind of writing exercises. And she suggested this in conjunction with my trying to figure out how to explain what my dissertation was. And I couldn't even really explain it to myself at first, but she said, you know, what if you were just writing a letter to a friend about what you're trying to do with, you know, not getting tripped up on terms, language, trying to please gatekeepers with like your, you know, a fantastic mastery of the literature. And I just found that this really helped me turn a corner. And I think that it's effective for this purpose as well. So the other thing that kind of goes in conjunction with this idea about discovering your voice and finding your subjects is really making that transition to sometimes believing. For me, sometimes it's been an act of faith that I am the expert in what I am writing, you know, that I have enough life experience or mastery of a subject that I am the expert. And so I would just encourage people when they're feeling, if you're feeling a little anxious or unsure, to really own your expertise, to believe when you're writing that you know best. And I think this will also help strip out some of the qualifying language and make it more active, the language, and more confident. And so when you're thinking about, well, what expertise do I have to share? You can consider, you know, your prior and your current positions, you know, in terms of employment, the subjects that you're studying, different studies that you might be conducting. Of course, your whole life experience. There's so much to draw on in your trajectory and where you've been and where you're going. Do you have hobbies? It's just so many dimensions that you can draw on. So I really encourage people to just trust in their own expertise. So, you know, it might seem obvious, but what is an op-ed? And so op-ed is the term traditionally to describe an article that was when you had the, you know, more people were reading print newspapers, it would be the page opposite the editorial page. So the editorial page would have letters, would have like the view of the publication, and then the op-eds would be, you know, somebody's individual position. And so often now, instead of op-ed, you will see these essays often also termed just opinion essays or guest essays. Like the New York Times has moved towards calling them guest essays. I think Washington Post too uses this terminology. Sometimes you'll see these columns listed as commentary, and they don't always have to be in a newspaper. They could just be in a website, they could be in a magazine. The pieces are typically short, and this is always, I think, a challenge generally, but also maybe a challenge for people who are used to writing on a bigger canvas. But this is really a piece which I find they're typically under 1,000 words, sometimes in different guidelines that you will see for different publications. They'll say, try to get it to like 650. I know articles that I've written for the Washington Post are very much like, try to get this to 800 words. I should also add that unlike different articles or features that you might pitch to an editor, these pieces, you will write the whole thing. So you will have a full draft and you will send this to an editor or, an email edit, op-ed inbox on spec, they call it. So it's like on spec is like short for speculation. You're not like just proposing an article, you will actually be writing the entire thing. So that's just something to keep in mind. And there are definitely different flavors of op-eds, and this does not capture all the flavors. Maybe it's like Baskin Robbins 31 flavors of op-eds. But I find, at least for the kind of op-eds that I've engaged with, some are kind of more policy focused. Some are very personal. And that's usually my vantage point, is that I kind of start with my own experience and then try to broaden out to the subjects that I'm focused on studying, whether it's social isolation, life course, gender, health, neighborhoods, etc. And then sometimes there's a hybrid. So you can think about for your own topics, do you feel comfortable sort of starting with a personal point and expanding from there? Maybe some people feel more comfortable just kind of sticking to the facts. I would say too, it's helpful, although sometimes you can't always predict who is your audience. Who do you feel like you might want to talk to? And this idea will guide the choice of your target outlet, the place that you're trying to get published. I think it's helpful sometimes to think about the audience in terms of, is this a regional and a local audience? Are you going to try to go national? Does it have broader appeal? Who do you want and how do you want to mobilize readers? And so these are just some examples, but if you have a piece targeted mostly towards politicians and elected representatives who are worried about getting elected again, that may have a very different take than if you're looking to just talk to more people who are in a scholarly community or kind of just ordinary people, community members. So this is not exhaustive, but this is just kind of an example of maybe some different groups that people may approach. So in terms of basic structure, I think about academic articles, scholarly journal articles have a form, right? And so do op-eds. And so in my field, I think of a social science peer-reviewed publication. There are different components that I'm used to as an academic thinking about. You have an introduction, you have a literature review, you have a method section, you have some section or some sections that present your data. You have a discussion and you have a conclusion. And me as a qualitative researcher, those are kind of things that I think about as some key components in a journal article. But I also find that op-eds have different components that are similar, kind of taking you back to maybe high school days or early college days, a 5-paragraph essay. And so you have usually a powerful opener. You have some paragraphs within the body of your article, which outline your article, and you have your supporting points there. And then you have something called maybe a kicker at the end, which kind of sums it up and like leads off into, the conclusion. And so I have found these following questions helpful in structuring my op-eds and ensuring that the piece contains these crucial components. These questions are by no means exhaustive, but I think they're a good way to get started and ease anxiety when faced with an empty page. And so I hope they'll be helpful to you and you can think about, how would I answer these questions? And hopefully they'll be helpful when drafting the idea and also in the free write and the breakout session in which you'll share your idea and receive feedback. And so what is the problem? Like, this policy is bad. What is the situation, the crisis, something that you're trying to highlight? What are the stakes? Like, why is this important? Why should readers care? So there's something that you need to have in your back pocket thinking about. This is a really important one. Why now? What is the urgency right now? Is there a policy or a vote that's going to happen? Is there something that happened, within the culture that we need to highlight? And so that's usually something that's a key concern. Why now? What is the urgency? Um, Going back to expertise in your perspective, why are you the right person to write this? What do you bring that's another writer maybe would not bring? And so you want to make sure that your expertise, your vantage point, your positioning is clear there. And what's your call to action? What are you advocating for? What do you want to happen? So I'll return to these questions in a bit when I walk through an example of how I've applied them in my own recent work. But I hope that this helps you think about how to apply them to your own op-ed in progress. In the meantime, I just want to share a couple of extra considerations about pitching and publishing your piece. So as I mentioned previously, um, it does help to identify your target outlet. Are you shooting this towards a regional or a local publication, something more national? Is this sort of a subject-oriented publication? Maybe it's a website, for instance, like focused on gender, or a health website, or what have you. So you will best determine where you want to send. I think a good place to start thinking about that, if you feel daunted, is what publications do you read and you like and are familiar with? And I'll give an example. The New York Times Magazine used to have a column called Lives. It was a personal essay column. And again, it was very accessible. You could just send your essay to Lives. And I did that when I was in my later 20s, right before I started my PhD program. And the editor there was very receptive, but he said basically, your article is a little bit too focused on New York because I'm from New York City. It was about neighborhoods. He directed me to another column, and it was called New York Observed. It was in the Metro section of the New York Times. And he said, before you reach out to this editor, study the column. And so I would say any place that you're trying to target, you want to see how long are the columns? How are they set up? Who did they publish? So I would say getting very familiar with your intended outlet is something that I would hope is helpful and I think is really important. So in terms of example outlets, traditional op-eds occur in newspapers, magazines, websites, um, but that's not all. And so for some people, trying to translate their scholarly work for an audience, and they may not feel quite ready to approach a newspaper, maybe that's just not the right outlet. I did want to highlight a couple of academic publications I'm familiar with and I've published with that have commentary and essay columns. So for instance, the journal Health Affairs has a whole section of policy briefs. And so these are, again, not exactly op-eds, but something in the op-ed vein in which you can kind of translate for a broader audience. The Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, has a personal essay column called A Piece of My Mind. And a lot of times people are physicians and working in healthcare, but I've also seen other professors, for instance, who are social scientists at my institution, UCSF, published there. And so again, not exactly an op-ed, but basically an essay that's intended to reach a broader audience housed within an academic journal. And then I'm a great fan of Context, and I have published different kinds of articles there. What I love about Context is that their submission guidelines are very clear, they are very responsive, and I've published, I would say, I don't want to mischaracterize the column. It's not exactly an op-ed, but it's a short piece at the end called One Thing I Know. It's usually, I think, about 800 words, and I published there. And so those are some options if you're not quite ready to sort of, send something to the Washington Post or your local newspaper, but that are accessible publications within journal outlets. Practically, I think one barrier that I'd like to demystify as much as I can in our short time together is, how do you even get started? Where do you send your piece to? And I would say, trial and error is okay, and it's inevitable. Many publications have submission or author guidelines that you should completely look at. And even like, I know that the Washington Post and I think the New York Times has had editor, like an article that they've published about, how do you get published, as an op-ed within their publication. So definitely, I think that those are resources that are helpful, and I highly suggest that you consult them. I always think it's best to also try to send your op-ed to a person, to an editor, and it just requires a bit of searching. Now, I would say if you upload your op-ed into like the New York Times, they have a form now, or if you, send an op-ed to the Washington Post, those inboxes are monitored. But I think having another version of the same email go to a person is always a good idea. And so I would say search engines, Google, social media. I don't use social media, but those are your friends when it comes to tracking down publicly available editorial contact information. I know in the Twitter days, I don't know what's going on with X now, but I would consult Twitter, and a lot of journalists, they were the originators of kind of, launching Twitter's popularity. And a lot of times editors, they want your writing. You're helping them with their job, so they will say like, please pitch me, here's my email. So I would say a little searching goes a long way. In terms of crafting the pitch email, okay, you've got this piece, you have somebody you want to send it to, what should you put in there? I think right up front, you want a quick overview of what the piece's argument is. What's the news hook? Like, is it tied to a news item and you need to highlight this? And this is why it's urgent and they should look at your thing right away. How long is the piece? I always put the word count in my pitch emails. A short bio. Who are you? Mine is I'm, a freelance writer and assistant professor of sociology at this university. And if you have prior publications, you might highlight that as well. I always tell them I'm going to follow up. I said, okay, this is very time sensitive. I might even check in tomorrow, or I'll check in by the end of the week, just so they know that I'm not going away. Again, if you have prior publications, or sometimes they call them clips in journalism, I always just include a couple of those at the end. And in terms of even the subject line in an email, they are getting hundreds of email, these editors. So I say very clearly, it's a pitch. If it's time sensitive, then I say, okay, it's time sensitive in the subject line. And I actually had somebody at the Times Union in Albany when I was a professor there. I published an article there, and an editor told me, if I did not see time sensitive in the subject line, I wouldn't have looked at it. And it was tied to like weather and snow. So it really was time sensitive. On the subject of time, time is of the essence often. And so I would say, don't let editors waste your time, and don't waste theirs. So this is a little bit of a do and don't, but at least this has been my experience. Always follow up. I think early on, when I was very anxious and scared and more of a novice, I was very hesitant to pester people, follow up. A polite but firm follow up is not going to harm anyone. And you may have to do it multiple times. Absolutely, when I say don't waste editors' their time, often op-ed will require that you are just sending it to them exclusively. So do not write an op-ed and send it, all over the place. One at a time is usually the rule. And thinking about your piece, is it time sensitive? Is it hooked to breaking news? Or is it something called an evergreen piece? It may not be so time sensitive. It could be timely. And a lot of times these sort of more, I think, experiential, scenic, timeless pieces are published, I have heard from editors, in the summer, in August, when people are kind of on vacation and going away and winding down a little bit, although it's hard to say in this year and with the chronic, news cycle that we have, if there's any slowing down.
Stacy, Stacy,
Yes.
we are almost up to that point where we need to transition. So if you could just
Okay. Sounds
do
good.
that.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Mindy.
sure.
So it's speaking of time sensitivity, I would say don't let I love this saying, and I repeat it to myself as I am trying to like bring an op-ed home and send it out. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I am a chronic perfectionist to my detriment. And so I would say at all costs, if you can resist perfection, if it's going to delay you getting the piece out quickly, that there are diminishing returns to trying to kind of make every single thing perfect. So if you can get it 85% of the way, I think that that's only going to facilitate your success. And you have to be mindful of budgeting time in for rejections. And finally, when I say get ready to pounce, there may be a subject that you write about a lot, and you're waiting for your hook. You're waiting to see, you're reading, observing the news cycle, and then you will see, oh wait, here's my entree, here's my opening. Something happened in the news that's hooked to an idea I already have percolating, and then that's the time to pounce and get it out. Um, Quickly, I would say, in terms of thinking about translating your work and writing accessibly, I always advocate for keeping it simple. And editors, if your piece is accepted and they work with you, they will simplify even more. But I think eliminating jargon as much as you can, or briefly defining key terms, is always welcome. Again, we don't want walls up. We're not trying to show how smart we are, how educated we are. We're trying to engage with people from lots of different backgrounds. And I'll never forget this Los Angeles editor that I had worked with at the Los Angeles Times. Her name is Valerie Nelson. She gave me this advice, and she said, look, you're aiming for an 8th grade level. And so even in a recent op-ed I had there, they changed this word that I had. I'm not even 100% sure how to pronounce it, honestly, puerile, and they changed it to childish. And I was like, oh, that was the right call. Finally, I would just say, before I transition to kind of my personal, self-diagramming of an example of how to apply these questions, absolutely don't give up and prepare for many rounds of rejection. I have had op-eds accepted to the New York Times on the first try. And I've also had op-eds that I was really proud of that have received like 20 rejections. And so it's a long haul. And you've got to just, if you really want to get this published, just keep trying and trying and trying. Unless it's really time sensitive. I've lost 1 or 2 pieces because it's like the election happened or something happened, and I couldn't quite get it back. Most pieces will find a home with time and effort and patience. And so I would just say good luck and stay strong.
Stacy,
Yes.
we are now at almost 1:45, which
Okay.
is,
So,
yeah, so we're tight on time.
okay, I'm going to do one more second, and I'm just going to say, if you would like to see this article, this was my latest op-ed in the LA Times. And again, talking about timely news hook, I sort of identified, look, we have a problem about how we talk about older adults. And I advocate for age inclusive language. And I had been thinking about this because I had been writing about it in my book introduction. The special counsel report, about classified documents had come in, and there was some very disparaging sort of description of President Biden. And so I had a problem. I said that this is going to harm everybody because it's just making people fearful of aging and encouraging internalized ageism. The urgency, again, the report had come out. My perspective and expertise as somebody who's studying older adults and had been writing about it. And my call to action was really looking at some of the age inclusive language that people in gerontology are using, changes to the Associated Press style book, and that we could sort of take a page from those changes and work it into our language. Mindy, are we good?
We are good.
All right.
And
Thank you so much.
thank you so much. So we are now, I don't know, Araceli, if you could bring me back here. Um, okay, great. So, and there's Stacy. So I'm up here. Hello. So if you look into the chat, you'll see the prompt questions. Basically, we're now focusing on developing your op-ed idea and getting feedback, and we're breaking you into groups of 3. So there will be a lot of the groups. Basically, everybody will have an opportunity to share their op-ed idea and get feedback. You'll have 3 minutes to share and about 2 minutes for feedback. And then you'll see, if you look at the chat, there's the questions that very much mirror what Stacy talked about. What's the problem you want to address? What are the stakes? Why now? What's your unique perspective and expertise? And what's your call to action? So when you're asking for feedback, it's fine for you to be upfront about the kind of feedback you want to receive. And when you are giving feedback, this is kind of a no-brainer, but bring your compassion and positivity and think about how you can help others strengthen their ideas so that it's compelling. So without further ado, we will move into our groups and we'll see you shortly. Thanks. I hope that that was helpful. And we have some time now actually to share a little of what you learned in your small group sessions. So at this point, we have over 60 people with us. And I guess the way we'll try and do it is if you would like to just share back what you talked about in your small group and kind of, the kind of thinking that you developed a little bit through your very quick free write, that would be great. So if anybody wants to start off, if you can just use the reaction thingy below and just raise your hand that way. Okay. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, Sammy, go for it. Yours is up first.
Uh,
And then Trina.
We had a really great session. I was just really grateful that I had the opportunity to work with everyone because it gave me an opportunity to take the focus of my op-ed and really narrow it down. I think that I started with a broad subject and they were able to help me get it to a more narrow focus. And I think that without our time together, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So I think that was really valuable for us in our time.
Would you mind sharing an example of what that looked like?
Of
Like
course.
what?
So
Yeah.
originally, just to share with me, I'm a first generation college graduate. I went from being a stay-at-home mom for the last 15 years and graduated in December of 23. And I've been looking for a job unsuccessfully. And so I kind of talked about how I was always told as a kid in my generation that, once you get a college degree, you kind of unlock this magical superpower that like jobs are just going to be handed to you. And that has not been my case. And what we really got to the root of is maybe it's not necessarily that it was my college degree not unlocking doors for me, but that I've been out of the workforce so long, being a stay-at-home mom, and that employers really look at not just those who've been out of the workforce, but stay-at-home moms differently because they don't necessarily view our experience as valuable. And so that is kind of the subject of the op-ed now, is kind of honing that. And I happen to be a stay-at-home foster to adopt parent. And one of the things is that my degree is sociology with focus on social inequality. And I'm actually disqualified from even applying to the agency where I fostered and adopted because it's a conflict of interest. So there's all these things kind of stacked against me. So we were able to kind of really narrow down the focus of my article to what happens and what workforces miss out on with moms returning to the workforce.
Okay, great, great, great.
Thanks.
So Trina, your hand's up, and what I'm going to ask is if Stacy, where are you? Oh, there you are. So after Trina shares her experience, can you just pipe in and talk about kind of what you're hearing from the two of them and maybe help shape some of the conversation? And then if anybody else wants to speak, we'll do that as well. Trina, go for it.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. Yep.
And thank you, Mindy. You've been also always a mentor. So thank you for doing this workshop. So our group, we talked about a couple of things. One, I think this relates to what Stacy was saying. Sometimes it's hard to write op-eds when you wear multiple hats, whether that be you're a professor, but you're also sitting on a committee or a board, etc., of an organization. For myself, I'm more an applied sociologist right now, and I'm doing more research in a seminary. So an op-ed I'd write about something has to come from me personally. I can't attach it to a university, even though I'm starting to adjunct again. But what we talked about, which is really helpful for me, was thinking about different data sources and being a sociologist that we can talk about complex questions. There's not always a right or wrong answer, but looking at the complexity for that. And if it matters, my issue is that I live in the suburbs of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. The Minneapolis City Council voted to raise the minimum wage for Uber and Lyft drivers to the city standard of $15 an hour. Now, Uber and Lyft are leaving all the Twin Cities. Now, I'm not against raising wages. I think that's commendable, but yet there are consequences to this with Uber and Lyft leaving, particularly people with disabilities, people who don't drive. And that's also coming out of a master's in social work, concerned about those kind of issues. And also I'm concerned about now Uber and Lyft drivers, they're not going to have jobs at all.
Mm.
And I think it's a timely issue. And my group helped me think about people I could use for statistics and research on this. So that's what I wanted to share. But again, I'd have to write this personally as someone as a sociologist, trained as a sociologist and a social worker.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Those are two excellent examples. Stacy.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Sammy and Trina, if you don't mind me using your first names, for sharing. And it's just really exciting. So in terms of Sammy, your share from your group, I'm so glad. I think it's so hard, but so important to narrow down the focus. And so I'm really glad that even in the short time you had, that you were able to kind of narrow down a little bit more. That's great. And in terms of kind of moving forward with your piece, one thing that I am really excited about is just for you to continue to think about, so what would your call to action be? And as somebody who's spent years and years as a family care worker and caregiver, I'm completely empathetic to the devaluation of such important work. And so perhaps a call to action would be like, okay, what could colleges and universities and like offices that are supposed to assist with job searches and internships, et cetera, what could they do to support parents, parenting students? Are there things that they are missing that you would think are helpful? And so that's for you to think about. And you're definitely the expert on that, on your own experience and experiences of students from similar vantage points. So I would be, again, very excited to see that. And there's so many different outlets you could publish that in, whether it's broadly, something more academic minded, et cetera. So very excited for that. And then Trina, I'm really also very happy that you're taking on this timely issue. And I think that you also point out an important consideration in terms of the hats that we can emphasize or not. And obviously it's not denying your position, but I do think like emphasizing some of the connections to larger issues, sociological issues, issues around inequality is definitely the right impulse. I think you're challenging the conventional wisdom. You're showing that like this is a complicated situation with implications that maybe we haven't fully thought out. And of course, I almost became a social worker. So I really do like that. And I have many students in sociology that I supervise that have social work backgrounds. And I think emphasizing that, because you have that experience on the ground, so providing service will be very compelling. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that.
Okay, well, great. Thank you so much, Stacy. Anybody else want to put up their hands, get a share of your conversation? This is a kind crowd. Yeah. Okay, Erin, go for it.
I could share about my project, but what I really wanted to share was what our group talked about when it came to, we were talking about why readers should care about our work. And I wanted to talk about this. Barb in our group shared this. We're not going to get everyone on our side. Not everyone's going to care about what we have to say. And she brought up the really good point that it's more important to be sure of your argument, and to remember that you're the expert. And I thought that was a really, really good. She said it so much better than, than how I'm getting it across. But I just thought that was a really great reminder that not everyone is going to care, and that if you spend so much time trying to make your argument perfect and trying to make your argument, fit all the pieces to what everyone is going to argue against what you have to say, that you're you're not going to get it out there, and it's just going to take up so much of your time, and it's just never going to be perfect. So to just be sure and remember that you're the expert. And I just thought that that was probably the biggest takeaway of our group's meeting. So I just wanted to share that
Yeah.
little snippet. It was really a great little breakout session.
Yeah.
So thanks, Barb.
Barbara, do you want to add anything since you were a part of that conversation?
I thought Erin did a great job with that.
Hard to call you out.
Not at all, not at all. We were all pointing fingers. It was so great to bounce ideas off of each other. And I have done the op-ed project sessions a couple of times. I served as an alum ambassador there, and one of the things that they always shared was this concept of to be sure, and that is that that there will be readers out there who are like, oh, but you. And so if you just sneak in a little, an acknowledgement of that, but that doesn't change what it is that you're trying to get across. And so, yeah, thanks for this opportunity. And I really, really appreciated everything I've learned so far.
Great, great. Cynthia, I see your hand is up.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for this workshop. This is very timely, and I've never heard about an op-ed piece until I got into grad school. And and then I found out from a course that I'm supposed to write an op-ed piece. And I'm like, what is an op-ed piece? So this is very timely. Thank you very much for this. In our group, we kind of like talked about some of our ideas, although not really fleshed out. But I want to talk a bit about my project because I struggle with the second basic guidance or structure of an op-ed, which is what are the stakes and why should readers care? I have always struggled with this. So the problem that I'm trying to address is that I noticed that a lot of video games are being adapted into virtual reality platforms. And considering the immersive potentials of virtual reality, because it's more immersive than other platforms, I think that we need to take a look at these trends that's coming up, because there are a lot of ethical issues with video games. About some studies have been linked violent video games to aggressive behavior and to less prosocial behavior. And I was just worried that if violent video games are now moving into immersive platform, whereby you are no longer holding a controller to shoot a gun, but you are really holding the gun, how would this affect the population as a whole? How would this affect society? So that's just what my project is about. But I find it difficult to think about why should readers care?
Stacy, do you want to dive in to that? Thank you, Cynthia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cynthia. It's interesting because I'm leading a dissertation writing workshop. Well, I just ended this quarter, and we have a student who's studying mental health and video games, and actually some of the positive aspects of kind of, having an outlet to work through grief by video games. But for your vantage point, I mean, I think that this is just so timely. There have been a number of so what I would suggest for you to do is to consult the recent Surgeon General reports. There have been kind of bulletins put out by the Centers for Disease Control, specifically about youth and mental health and technology use. And so I think that that would be something for you to kind of be able to hook your interest, which I think is already timely and compelling, to those reports and to think about some of the implications. And I think to some of the points that have been made before, that you do want to approach it with nuance. You don't want to just sound an alarm like video games are evil and they're destroying our youth, but, to kind of trace out what this specific bridge and kind of making them more immersive, maybe this is challenging for certain younger people, for instance, or certain older people, whoever's playing video games. And I don't know what demographics you'll focus on, but that's kind of what I would do. I see some more hands, so I'll shut up.
Thank you. So we've got Sangeeta, your hand was up first, and then Autumn. And I think that that's the time, that's all the time we have for the questions for now. Sangeeta, go for it.
Uh, Hi, thank you. This was we had a really good session with Stacy. I had actually two main questions. One of the questions was how, when I teach students, what are some of the things I should keep in mind? And Stacy gave me really good pointers, and then she said she could send me a handout that she uses in her class. The second thing that kind of came to me, kind of those moments when things gel together. So my own research I was doing and health on happiness, and then at the moment when as I was talking to Stacy, I kind of wrote down it was how in my own views, which are very political and kind of tend to be aggressive, so I don't write living in Texas. So she had good suggestions for that. Some of the places that I could approach, or places where this would be more acceptable in terms of finding my correct audience. So that came out really well. And I also kind of, my own research came together with, if I want to approach it on a public platform, like, how do I do it? So this was really good. This was excellent for me. Thank you, Stacy.
Excellent. That's great. Autumn, do you want to go next?
Yeah. So we were talking in our group, and something that I'm interested in writing for this, and I was trying to like go through the 5 basic structures. And I think the one that I was kind of struggling with the most was like, how would I kind of word my call to action? So my interest, my work, is looking at the recent trigger bans that have come with overturning of Roe. I'm from Tennessee and I'm now living in Kentucky, both that have strict abortion bans. I myself am a mother of 3, and I've worked in labor and delivery for over 4 years. So I have both healthcare and kind of personal background to this. But I'm wanting to actually make the address of maternal health care that coincides very strictly with abortion care. And my op-ed, I was thinking about wanting to kind of work on addressing the gray areas of a lot of these abortion bans, a lot of them being like only in the case of, danger to the mother, which is still very gray, which is kind of giving doctors, physicians that I have worked with personally, the struggle of like how and who defines when a woman's life is at risk, especially in cases of maternal crisis, such as like, miscarriage, ectopic pregnancies, this and that. So I was wanting to kind of write it in a way that would be, I guess, kind of a push to everyday individuals, like voters, to kind of talk about these things when we've got elections coming up, to kind of push on like having a more clear description and definition of what we mean, to where, women who are or who hope to get pregnant one day have like a better understanding of their rights in cases of maternal health care. Because I feel like that also gives us an idea of if we want to have children too. So I think that's kind of where I'm struggling, is kind of structuring that a little bit more and how to put it into words to make my call of action very clear.
Okay. Thank you. Sounds like interesting and important conversation, really good stuff that you need to get out there. So in the interest of time, I mean, we could keep going for forever, and I want to hear what all of you talked about, but we're going to move into our second breakout session. And actually, Arisali, can you just put the prompts into the chat, please? So essentially, now we're moving. We don't have as much time in this next one. We're hoping that the same 3 people who are in each group will continue to be in the next one. This one will focus on, trying to get your pieces published, and just to get you thinking about, who's your target audience, what type of outlets are you considering pitching your article, what kind of publications or websites that might be a good fit? Do you have connections in these outlets? I think Stacy also wanted to suggest that people came up with 3 possible outlets that you might reach out to. So Alrighty, so we're gonna move into the breakout groups where we have 10 minutes this time. So is everybody back? I think maybe it's sort of, okay, great. So we're all back. So we're moving on. It does feel like I hope people don't feel like this is too crunchy time-wise. But now we'd like to just open it up with a Q&A with Stacy. So whoever's there, this is your moment. And I'm just going to kind of keep my eyes. If you could just use the function of raising your hand if you have a question for Stacy, that would be great. Anything that may have come up in your session or questions that are just kind of hanging for you.
I was just going to say, I see Jasmine and Sammy. So Jasmine, please go ahead if you're ready. Thank you.
Good. Thanks. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, got it.
Yeah, my question was about, like, I guess sort of steeling yourself if you had to for any like public pushback or feedback, because for me, that is actually where like the most intimidation is, and particularly because if I were to be writing, it would be around like issues of like gender and feminism, and so like it's at the intersection of like feminism and pop culture, and so like I have this like innate fear. I was like, what if this goes viral? Like,
yeah,
it's not in the sense I don't want that to seem egotistical. It's more of like a fear thing. Like if this actually does get picked up, I like, have fear of like my inbox like blowing up and being like just not wanting to deal with it. So I kind of wanted to see how you like let go of like, yes, you want people to read it, but then also like, oh man, like what if a lot of people read this? And
right, yeah, I know. Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. It's difficult to plan for, but it is a real consideration. And I have to say, sometimes I have gotten like the piece has been picked up by other outlets and I've gotten, actual hate mail. I'll give an example. And there's no, I mean, I've been fortunate, I know, in all seriousness, people have received death threats. I mean, very, very scary feedback, or well, more than feedback, right? Threatening email, threatening contact. I haven't gotten that. I have gotten, some hate mail on pieces. And recently in the summer, I got my piece. I had a piece about basically what I argued was excessive security in supermarkets. And this was, it was about retail theft. And I was arguing that I think this is bad for community, bad for shoppers, bad for like the public good. This article ran in in the Los Angeles Times. And again, this is an article that was inspired by me going to a supermarket in Oakland and seeing all this drastic security. I thought, it's an article about supermarkets. This touched a nerve. And they actually, Fox News picked up this article, put it on their homepage, and all of the kind of key words that they felt were going to, bring readers to me in a very negative way. It was like San Francisco professor basically advocates for stealing. That was the kind of gist of their take on my article. And it completely was, not. And it is calling for what was it? It was like something like a socialist checklist of like a living wage and, more food stamps for people, et cetera, et cetera. And I had a whole bunch of hate mail and I had to figure out where this came from. And so, the way that I have dealt with this is I actually do try to respond to a lot of my reader email. Even if I feel like somebody is nuanced and has a disagreement, I try to, respond to that. I may not, agree. The stuff that is really kind of frothing at the mouth, I can't go back and forth because this person doesn't want to have a conversation. And I've had a lot of people that I feel just want to unload something on me. So those, will not get a response to me for me. I will say I never read my reader comments on an article. I don't feel like I don't have the time for it. I don't need to know. Sometimes people say, oh, there was like so many good ones. And I'm like, it reminds me of, I think it was the writer David Foster Wallace, who said like he didn't read his reviews because he didn't want to eavesdrop on a conversation maybe he didn't want to hear. So I do set certain boundaries in protecting myself. One thing I would say is I guess maybe I don't think enough about maybe the potential. Maybe I would be too terrified to write anything if I thought about the potential response. So that usually hasn't been first and foremost in my mind. but I completely would understand if it is. So, you know, you do have to think about, especially if it's your first piece, what do you want to lead with? What do you feel comfortable with? What do you feel comfortable sharing? So all great considerations.
So
Thank
there were a
you.
few, thank you, Stacy, and great questions. There were a few questions people put into the chat like early on. And so I just want to circle back to some of those folks. So C. Ren, or actually Jen, is that right? You had a comment that about publishing opinion pieces as a grad student. So do you want to just share your thoughts or your question?
Or
I'm
should
not
I
sure if
chime
it's
Oh,
going
in?
to
no,
me, but
sorry.
my
I'm sorry. I
hand
have
is
the
up,
wrong,
but it wasn't me.
it wasn't, oh, sorry, wrong person. C. Ren Morton. I'm sorry. Are they still here? No. Okay. Oh, wait, you are still here. I see you. Do you want me to?
Oh, do I have my hand up accidentally? I don't think I had
Your
a
hand
question.
wasn't up. I just, well, maybe I'll just read your
Oh.
question, which is, you said, as graduate students, how does publishing opinion pieces count towards our PhD publishing requirements? Okay, thank you
Yes.
for that question. Sorry, I
Thank
kind
you.
of
Sorry.
confused two people.
No
Yeah.
worries. I can chime in. I did publish some personal essays and opinion pieces as a graduate student, not many because I was focused on my dissertation and trying to, you know, get fellowships to support my work. And so I would say that for me, whenever I wrote these pieces, I assumed they counted for nothing, that was just something that came out of me that I wanted to write. And I felt like I had the tools because I had this sort of writing background when I had time. But I would say in terms of my own career and what I recommend, at least to the students that I work with, you know, your promotion, whether that means, you know, finishing your dissertation, finding your first position, is not going to be made on op-ed writing or writing for wider audiences. It's going to be focused on the currency in our profession right now is peer-reviewed publications, getting your dissertation out, all of those things. That said, I do feel that my op-ed writing has worked in concert with academic interests that I have, has brought people to me. I mean, including my book editor for a university press book that got me a job. So it's hard to say. So I would say, you know, definitely you want to, you know, I would encourage you to keep the flame alive for this kind of writing, but understand what time you can devote to it. Or maybe if it's like, you know, a summer where you have a little bit of time, you're not like in exams or you're not like tied up with other things, but definitely keep perspective on it and balance on it.
Okay, great. Nilly, you had a question both in the chat and now your hand's up. So do you want to share with us?
Sure, and it's a quick question, and if you want, I can also combine it with another question I saw in the chat. Stacy, you mentioned before that in the email to the editor when you were pitching your piece, you should mention previous publication. Were you relating to just like other op-eds, or could it also be to academic publications? And then along those lines, somebody asked in the chat if we can like use citations in an op-ed.
Thank you. Those are excellent questions. So when I was mentioning prior publications or clips, I think where my mind was going was kind of in my journalism writing background, where if you do have anything previously published that's kind of for wider audiences, you definitely want to highlight that. But that said, if you do have academic publications, I think it's worth, you know, you don't have to give like a detailed summary every one, but just including some links to those publications because it shows you have experience getting your work out into some sort of published form. And academic articles, I strive to write my own academic articles in a way that's accessible. And I've actually had a lot of media attention for an article I wrote about older people gossiping in New York City for the Journal of Gerontology. Like I just recently, okay, the pop star Dua Lipa has a website called Service 95, and they wrote an article about gossip, and it just went up. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, I need to get my message out everywhere, whether it's like to Dua Lipa or it's to, you know, I don't know, like the Gerontology Association. Like I would just, you know, it's like my older guy friend used to always say, just spell my name right, you know? So I think highlight whatever publications you have. That also speaks to your expertise in certain research fields that you may have. And then the second question was, I'm so sorry, what was it about? Please remind me.
Including citations within the op-ed.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So you're going to do it in a different way. And a lot of times you will kind of probably, if you have like a report, a statistic, you will do a link right in the op-ed body. And so you may not even mention all of the authors. Sometimes they'll get stripped away anyway. You can try, but if it's a prominent, sociologist or academic in your field, you can say, this person said this in that book, but usually it'll be just kind of even more subtle and it'll be a link. And I should say too, just logistically, when you do pitch these articles, you want to have the text in the body of the email usually. You usually do not want an attachment. So that's something that's just practically to remember. Mindy, you're on mute.
How do you like that? I decided to finally quiet myself. So, hello. Sammy, could you go next, please?
Yes, you mentioned when you have pitches, the one at a time approach. Is it just that when you submit to one publication and you get the rejection letter, then you're free to submit it to another, or is there like a grace period?
That's an excellent question. So yeah, that's when we were talking a lot about that actually in my small breakout group. So sometimes, I always look at this as a blessing, the quick rejection. If they get back to you and they're like, this is not for us, that's fantastic. One time I had an article and it was a one-word rejection and they said, pass. And then an hour later, I got it published like in the Daily News or something. This was as a graduate student. Oftentimes, though, you're going to have to hunt people down. And so, I think don't be afraid to follow up, and don't be afraid to follow up again. And don't be afraid to tell them, if I do not hear from you by the end of the day, this day, thank you so much. I can imagine you have a lot of, pitches to review, and I'm going to move on. And so don't be afraid there. I think if you are really having trouble hunting down somebody for a rejection and a certain number of days has passed, usually like a standard, I would say for a newspaper, for instance, they say pretty much assume it's passed on after 3 business days. So I think that's fair, but I always like to be really careful because editors, it's a small world, they move around. And I would just like to, I give them one last chance and say, okay, again, I'm assuming it's been 3 days. If I don't hear from you by close of business, I will move on. Thank you so much for your consideration.
I was just going to say, or is there some empowerment we have to just say like time sensitive, like this pitch will be, sent on after this many days?
You could do that at the out front. I'm a little hesitant to do that just because I feel like, I do want to give them a sense of you have a little bit of time to consider it. So for myself, that might be a little bit too bold, but I'm not saying it's not, if you're feeling it and you're just like, this has to be considered today only or not, go for it. Just obviously as politely as you can, polite but firm.
I think there's another element, which is that you want them to think that you really want their outlet to publish it because you think that it's a good match for them, and they hopefully will feel like, oh, okay, we're unique in a certain way. It's just it's all about relationships.
Excellent.
Yeah, Trina, we have about a minute. Can you kind of shrink what you have to say?
Okay, just concisely, we've talked a lot about like big publications like the New York Times, LA Times, or other ones, but what about publishing in like, I'm still in the metro, but smaller newspapers? I've done work in public relations with Planned Parenthood. I've gotten the death threat letters. Spelling was incorrect, but my question is, how do you balance, especially in the times of Trumpism, where people aren't always like, oh, you're just an elitist sociologist, right? How do we balance these kind of issues too with writing in more local outlets? And I hope the question makes sense, but I think it's important in these times.
Yeah. And I think, again, sometimes those outlets are the people you really want to talk to more, in your local community. There's a website an outlet that I think is wonderful for people working on policy issues in California, called Cal Matters, CalMatters. They have a commentary column. I think it's just about, again, thinking about the audience. what kind of change or what kind of sort of awareness do you want to raise? One of my most favorite pieces that I wrote was when I was at SUNY Albany, upstate New York at the university there for 2 years. They did a horrendous job of clearing the snow in Albany proper, which is the capital of New York. And I have a sister who is disabled and uses a walker and a wheelchair. My work has been about older adults, and it was really deriving, again, like this is a very local issue, but one that is really impacting and harming people who will have to walk in the street and are going to be homebound because you're not clearing the snow. So that was something that, was very local, but I felt kind of had broader implications. So that's just, one example, but I think your question is really excellent. And I think it's just, sort of thinking about your imagination in terms of who do you want to talk to, when, where, how.
Mhm. Well, I think I hate to say this is it, but thank you to all of you who have stuck around for almost 2 hours. This has been a fantastic workshop. Thank you, Stacy. If you want to add something into the chat about how your experience was, that would be helpful. And I just want to also tell you that this is not the end of the line. This is, as I said earlier, this is part one of 2 sessions that we're doing. Our feeling is that this was a good jumping off point, but what we really like to do is create some support groups for people to continue this dialogue as you're figuring out how to write and promote your work. So we're going to be organizing what we're calling an op-ed-a-thon. We haven't selected a date yet, but you will hear all about it, and we will welcome you back. And the central thing in it will be to do breakouts by topic if we're able to do that, so that you can talk. I mean, I have this sort of fantasy that you're going to develop a strategy on a particular topic, and that 10 local areas will get op-eds all at the same time, and a national op-ed. So, I think we can do it. We have to. This is a moment in time where our voices are really critical. So it's great to hear that you've had good conversations, and, we will continue this. So thank you very much, everybody, for showing up, and we'll see you soon.